much for joining us in this new edition of European Chats. My name is Petros, and I'm reaching out to you from the Brussels office of the European Movement International. Our intention is to bring people together from across Europe, our activists, our campaigners on the ground, from the different European movements throughout the continent, to discuss current issues, share intelligence, exchange views, and understand better how the current crisis is affecting Europe and what should be the next steps for the institutions, but also for us as citizens. So today, I'm really lucky to be joined by two wonderful colleagues, Aku, who is coming from Finland, from the European Movement Finland, and Noelle, who is heading the European Movement Ireland office in Dublin. Thank you both very much for joining. I'm glad to see that the sun is shining throughout Europe. Certainly, the mood seems to be changing a little bit after the first couple of months, but we all found ourselves in lockdowns. But the questions still remain pertinent. How is the situation in your country? How are people responding to the current crisis? And what you, as civil society organizations, are doing in that context? Noelle, perhaps I can start with you.
Great. Thanks, Petros. Hi, everybody. And a very warm welcome to the Dublin offices, European Movement Ireland. I think today is forecast to be the hottest day of the year in Ireland. So I hope everyone is keeping safe and well. Yeah, Petros, you touched upon a couple of interesting points there in terms of the response here in Ireland to the COVID pandemic. I think it was the 29th of February, Ireland reported its first case, and then the 12th of March, the day after the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 to be a pandemic, our Prime Minister, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, when he was in America for the traditional St. Patrick's Day parade, announced that schools, colleges, large events to be closed and events postponed. So effectively, we in European Movement Ireland were somewhat had the foresight to have trialed remote working from home. So pretty much on the 12th of March, staff and colleagues began working remotely from home. And then here in Ireland, on the 28th of March, mandatory stay at home and the 2-kilometre travel limit was introduced. And then at the start of May, some good news in terms of the announcement as to how Ireland would reopen the country, would transition out of the lockdown. And we are essentially 5 phases of that, with different restrictions in terms of community health, education, childcare, the workforce. So it's basically like this, starting from the 18th of May up to the 10th of August. And, you know, for example, on the 8th of June, the travel limit extends from 5 kilometres to 20 kilometres. And then a big one for us, for many of us anyway, the 20th of July, hairdressers are due to open here in Ireland. So that's still a good bit away. And then obviously the end of August then, hopefully workforces will begin, most workplaces will begin to have come back with the social distancing, the very strict public health and safety guidelines in place, and the travel restrictions will hopefully have been listed at that stage. So in terms of how people have been dealing with it here in Ireland, I think broadly, quite well. There's been strong buy-in and support in terms of the initiatives being undertaken by the government, notwithstanding that we're still 100 plus days after our general election. So government formation talks are taking place in the background, but the public are very much, broadly in support of the measures being undertaken. The government is being very much guided by the Chief Medical Officer and NEFIT, which is the National Public Health Emergency Team. So there seems to be a buy-in, and people are trying to follow that advice and guidelines. That being said, I think people are beginning to get a little bit weary of the restrictions somewhat. It was the June bank holiday weekend here in Ireland. And, People were out and about. Things are starting to pick up. And obviously, there's an important requirement as well to start opening back up the economy, start opening back up business, whilst all obviously being cognizant and paramount importance people's health and well-being. So that's just a brief overview on how the country in Ireland is doing it. Ourselves as a civil society organisation, no more Petros than yourselves and EM International and Aku in Helsinki and other colleagues throughout the wider European Movement International network. It has forced us to look at and consider how we carry out our operations, what we do, how we go about it. So, for example, what we've seen is a big transition. Instead of hosting physical events around the country, instead of having citizen dialogues physically in the different provinces on the conference on the future of Europe, on Brexit, on the budget, we are all now transitioning those to an online virtual format. So we've had everything from Andrew McDougall, the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, taking part in a webinar with our members. And we, in an hour, I will be doing one on the EU budget and the MFF with Andreas Schwartz, the director in DG Budget. So we're looking creatively at how we do it. We've had to change a lot of how we do things. Obviously, Europe Week this year was somewhat different. But I think we are coping and adapting well. Our team are working remotely and safely, and that's the most important thing. But we continue to work ceaselessly to develop that connection between Ireland and Europe and between all of our European colleagues and counterparts. So that's kind of where we're at. We're still as busy as ever.
Well, this is more important at the moment because exactly people felt quite isolated due to the lockdown. The physical restriction in place created a huge gap in our society. So the role of civil society organizations became even more important in that context to create individuals, but also causes that are very crucial at the moment. Aku, if I may come to you for an instance, Finland's response was very similar to a lot of other countries, and I'm curious to see what the reaction has been. Again, a bit like what Noelle was saying, the reaction in Ireland at the beginning, and how are people feeling now 3 months into the lockdown?
Yeah, thank you, Petros, and hello to everyone. Good to see you live. I think in Finland, so far we've tested about 185,000 people for COVID, and we've had about just under 7,000 cases so far, with about 320 deaths. Currently, we only have about 10 people in hospital, so it's getting a lot better than what it was in the worst cases. And we are not seeing that many new cases, new deaths, new hospitalized people, and at the same time, the restrictions set by the Finnish government, they have been lifted, many of them, such as the travel bans, such as the limitations on restaurants, closing down the schools. And for the past few months, actually, the restaurant scene was quite dead in Finland. They were only allowed to sell takeaway food. And you can imagine the damage these limitations have set upon the hospitality and restaurant industry in Finland. The restaurants were allowed to open up again now, just on the 1st of June, with some limitations to opening hours and numbers of customers they're allowed to have in the premises. Food stores and similar establishments have stayed open throughout this crisis, but we have had some restrictions on elderly people and people who are considered to be in risk groups. They have been told to self-quarantine themselves still. We haven't seen the full impacts of these decisions to open up the society yet. Overall, it can be said that in Finland, and the Finnish people in general, they have been reacting to this whole crisis quite well. They have taken the restrictions that have been set to them quite well. There has not been any rioting, there has not been much demonstrations, and I believe we've only seen one radio mast burnt down due to the 5G conspiracy related to COVID-19. So we are doing all right, even though the financial hit has not really revealed itself to us completely. From a political perspective, I believe the biggest topic at the moment would be the next generation EU proposal by the Commission. The Finnish business industry and labor organizations have reacted positively to the suggestion, but the politicians have not. And a majority of our politicians, not just the EU-hating populists, see this proposal as an attempt to increase our financial liabilities, and they feel that the EU is breaking the fundamental rules and regulation. So, the traditional political parties, they agree that we must do something, but they're not sure what they want the outcome to be. They know that they don't want to see a fiscal union as the end result of this project. So overall, we are taking steps forward towards what can be called normal life, but now the political discussion really starts in Finland about how to save businesses and jobs, and we are really involved in that discussion as well.
That was going to be my next question to both of you. First of all, what has been the reaction of citizens towards the EU in these first few months of the lockdown, the perception of the EU's response on the ground, but also what is now the response that the EU has come forward with some very ambitious proposals in the different countries. Aarva, if you want to continue, since you were already touching upon this, first of all, how did Finns view the EU's initial response? And yes, if you can elaborate a little bit more on the reaction to the proposals, and I'll come to you, Noelle, right after.
Yeah, certainly, Petros. Well, initially, I believe in Finland there was a sense that the European Union isn't doing much. And like so often we see in these discussions, it is easy for the national politicians to kind of shift the blame towards the European decision makers. And this was evident in the media as well. So there was a sense that we are hoping more out of the European Union, even though we were not quite sure what we actually wanted. And as the decisions on closing the borders and limiting people's movement, they were made nationally, and there was not that much the European Union could actually do in regards to this pandemic. It kind of created a feeling among the population that the European Union is not doing enough. Now we are shifting to a situation where the European Union has had its kind of act together, and there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of coverage on what the European Union is doing at the moment in Finland as well. So people's attitude has changed up until the next generation EU proposal, which was the big news last week and still continue to be in the future. I think this is it's sort of an echo from the Euro crisis, from the Greek bailout that we are hearing in Finland. Again, the attitude of the politicians especially has been surprisingly negative towards the proposal, especially towards the part where we would be, as they say in Finland, handing out money. So they're not that into it. But hopefully we will be able to find a compromise that will also suit the Finnish politicians. We are not in the group led by Austria at the moment, but we are not too far from them either.
Interesting. Noelle, how about Ireland? How you every year you put out a very interesting opinion poll and research about the attitude of Irish people towards the EU and specific issues. And for the first time in a long time, you notice a small drop in support of the EU. I should say for all our viewers that still support for the EU is over 80% in Ireland, so remarkably high. But to what degree do you think the crisis, the pandemic crisis, had an effect in people's attitudes towards the EU?
Yeah, no, thanks, Petros. A very good point. Last year in 2019, in European Movement Ireland's annual survey poll that you mentioned, Petros, support for our Irish membership of the EU reached an all-time high of 93%, which really was a somewhat of a Brexit bounce, if I can put it that way. This year, that that level of support dropped to 84%, which is the highest level, the highest drop in support, but it's still an incredibly healthy 84% support for Ireland remaining a member of the EU. But also in our poll, we also asked people in Ireland how they felt the EU had responded to the COVID pandemic. So when we did the fieldwork sample, it was very interesting. And Aku, it was interesting to hear you talk about the number of cases and the testing that is in Finland. In Ireland, we have had just under 25,000 cases and over 1,600 deaths, with many of those taking place in the nursing home sector. So there was a big focus here in Ireland on how to manage that, how to procure PPE, and what was the EU doing in relation to that. So when we asked that question, in the polling fieldwork sample back in March, we saw 47% of people agreeing that the EU had responded well thus far to the COVID crisis, with 46% disagreeing. So very, very evenly divided, so to speak. Now, I think, as Aku also mentioned, focus has come on the MFF, the Next Generation EU, the unprecedented budgetary measures. Ireland is now a net contributor to the EU budget and has been over the last number of years. So this is something we are obviously watching, we're going to be mindful of. And I think Ireland would have, post-Brexit, was trying to navigate and build alliances and would have collaborated very closely with the Hanseatic League, then more laterally issued a call to support the Corona bonds. So I think Ireland sees very much a strong and important role for the EU to fund and support and grow business coming out of this lockdown and this recession, because it is absolutely imperative that the EU supports the different member states in transitioning out of the recession. We often say over here, we use the expression in some of our engagements that we tend to nationalize success and Europeanize failure. And I really think that the EU has an opportunity and an obligation to start Europeanizing success as to how we transition out of this COVID pandemic.
Indeed. And that is a problem I think we're witnessing everywhere across the EU, and that's a feedback that a lot of our colleagues in the capitals come back with. The support of the EU is quite high in Finland too, of course. To what degree do you think that public mood in favor of EU membership might eventually have an effect on the attitude of politicians towards the proposals of the European Commission for the recovery phase?
Yeah, well, that's a difficult question, because even though the general population has supported EU membership and has seen it as a positive thing for the Finnish population, Finnish nation, for some reason, after the big populist parties that we have in Finland, they got some support and some power. The old political parties have become really careful about how they treat and discuss European Union and politics related to it. So we still kind of see a situation where our politicians hesitate quite a bit to take a strong stand for Europe, whether it be during this pandemic or in general. And I'm hoping that this crisis shows to all that populism isn't the answer here. The simple remarks and the simple solutions that the populists offer, they do not solve this pandemic, and they will not solve any of the other issues that we face in Europe. So perhaps I'm hoping in Finland that the positive outcome, at least so far, that comes out of this pandemic would be that our politicians will see that they don't have to be afraid of the populists or afraid of the minority of the population who are anti-EU. So I'm really hoping that we will see a situation where we will take a stronger stand for, the common operations that the European Union is doing at the moment.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point, and it also leads to the next question I had in mind. I think it's useful to discuss a little bit about the future of the EU going forward. As you know, and probably some of our viewers also know, the Commission had put on the table, and of course the other institutions, the idea of holding a conference on the future of Europe, a series of public discussions with a variety of stakeholders, national and European, about the direction the EU should be taking. Everything, of course, was put on hold because of the pandemic crisis, but the debate is still there and slowly being reawakened. So I'd be curious to hear your views from your perspectives, as they are informed from the environment you are in. What do you think are the key issues that the EU should be working on going forward? Perhaps, Noelle, if I may, I can start with you. From an Irish perspective, obviously Brexit dominated the discussion over the last couple of years. The UK's decision to leave the EU has had a profound effect on Ireland too, inevitably. And this is still very much at the minds of everyone in Dublin and throughout the country. But I'm wondering, what do you think, as a European move in Ireland, in your conversations with politicians and stakeholders around the country, where should be the EU going now, after the crisis especially?
Yeah, no, really good question, Petros. I think one of the most sobering findings of our poll when we asked people was, do you believe your voice is heard as a citizen of the EU? And that finding, it really shocked me and saddened me in terms of the results of that, because we had 48% disagreeing, 19% not knowing, and only 33% of people surveyed felt that their voice was heard as a citizen of the EU. So in terms of debating the future of Europe, I really think there's a responsibility on all of us in civil society organizations and networks such as the European movement to ensure that we listen to citizens, that we hear people's perspectives and get their different viewpoints on the issues that are facing them. So coming out of the COVID crisis, it's going to be on supporting business, supporting economy, making society more just, equal and fair, the just transition, and also climate change, the Green Deal. How is this going to be supported and implemented across the EU? And also, notwithstanding, I was doing a very interesting webinar with GlobeSec last week, and we talked about a multi-speed Europe and a la carte Europe. Regardless of which direction the EU takes, and in debating the whole future of Europe theme, what we cannot have is any democratic backsliding or lessening of the rule of law and a diminution of the values of which the European Union was founded for. Because now, more than ever, we see the importance of upholding, maintaining, and strengthening those values. And I think those key big issue items are going to be what resonates with people here in Ireland, but also across the EU. I mean, Brexit will always be a huge area of concern for the island of Ireland, but it is not the only issue. We have to look at things like climate change, the migrant crisis, and ensuring that the EU is fit for purpose in an unprecedented geopolitically changing world that who knows how things are going to develop over the next short while.
Indeed. And I just want to echo a little bit what you said, because we conducted similar research in the context of the European elections last year. So the figures are not as current as yours, but we also noticed very low levels of response when we asked people how empowered they felt. In fact, there was a common sense of disempowerment in relation to people's confidence that their governments are listening to them. And this wasn't just about the EU. This was the question we asked in 13 countries was about the national government as much as anything else. But there is a pattern here, clearly. People feel that their voice isn't heard. And as a result, they feel alienated from politics in general, whether European or national. Aarva, if I can come back to you with the same question. What do you think should be the direction that the EU takes, both as a response to the current crisis, but also in general, as a response to everything else that is going on in the world around us?
Certainly, Petros. I think Noelle actually covered a lot of the topics that are also important for the Finnish people. But let me just say, we need more dialogue. We need more mutual understanding, and this crisis is unlike anything we have seen in a long while, and it really has the potential to drive us apart. And it's not only within the European Union, but also globally. As you've seen, President Trump first cutting off the funding of World Health Organization, and now apparently severing all ties with the organization. So you can see the superpowers of the world are drifting apart, and their leaders are really boosting their own agendas and popularity through this conflict creation. And to me, not to sound too grim here, but to me, these are echoes from the time preceding the First World War. Old men with limited interest and understanding in diplomacy are turning us against each other, and to me, it's really frightening. So today, I think more than ever after the big wars, we really need to sit down and find a path forward together. And I don't really think President Ursula von der Leyen foresaw this pandemic when they were talking about the conference on the future of Europe. But to me, this couldn't come at a better time. The whole future of Europe and the world really require it. And we must find a common path forward. The EU must take a stronger role in the global political scene, and we really must increase the role EU plays there. At the same time, the conference on the future of Europe is about what EU citizens want from EU. These events that are still finding their format, I really hope that the kind of outcome of these discussions that we will see in the coming years produce some data that really are both comparable between countries, but also give these nations, these leaders, a common direction. Like I mentioned, in Finland, the politicians, they are really afraid to, take a strong stand for Europe because they're afraid of the, voters' reactions. If the politicians fail to show us the path, the people must do it. And I hope that the conference on the future of Europe can be one of the tools that we use to find it.
Yeah. As we are getting ready to wrap up the conversation, we should also remind ourselves that about a year ago we had the European elections, and that was a very powerful exercise of European democracy. We saw an increase in the turnout and a very good showing of pro-European parties, those that are in favor of the European project and the values it represents. So like both Noelle and you, Aarva, said, we have something substantial to build on, exactly because so many of our fellow citizens took the time and they came forward and they cast their ballot and they expressed their views in those elections. It is important for us to continue the dialogue, and rather than forgetting about them for the next 5 years and only coming back when we need them to vote, we should have constant debate and discussion with them. And of course, the European movement and other civil society organizations throughout Europe are a great platform to have that conversation, keep going, both among ourselves, but with the institutions at the national and the European level also. I think the only thing I can do is thank both Aku and Noelle for joining me today. It was a wonderful opportunity to talk to dear colleagues from different sides of Europe. Thank you also to all those of you who joined us, be it on social media, through the website, and in any other fashion. We're going to continue these conversations, and we hope you're going to stay tuned. But don't hesitate to contact us, both us here in Brussels, but also our colleagues in Dublin and Finland, and many others that are tirelessly working to promote the European projects throughout Europe, day in and day out. Thank you again very much. Enjoy the rest of the week and see you next time.